serious sailors, seamen and overall people who spend a vast amount of time in the ocean. Have you ever witnessed something you would catalog as supernatural or unusual? What was it like? I crewed on a TAL ship and we were anchored with a bunch of others in a harbor. We had to take shifts at night because it was an old boat and did weird things. I was on shift in the little steering cabin when I heard someone running around the deck. I thought it was one of the other crew, so I poked my head out and told them to knock it off. They kept running and I was afraid they'd slip, so I followed them. We went around the whole ship twice before I caught up with a shapeless shadow which stopped and flew directly up into the air. Convinced it was a prank, I walked back to the end of the boat when I saw we had drifted on anchor and were almost under the bow of a much larger ship. I called the rest of the crew and we sorted it out. But I might not have noticed until too late if it weren't for the weird shadow. If you ever obtain a time machine, you know what to do. Flew helicopters in the Navy for a few years. On my first deployment to Southeast Asia, I was flying over the Sea of Japan and saw a large pulsing aura of red light far enough below the surface I could not make out a source. We were 30-ish miles from shore and had not been briefed on any assets in the area that might make something like that make sense. No erroneous indications on instruments or radio chatter. Just slow, steady pulsing red light. We saw it, circled it a few times, made a note of the time and location we encountered it, and my crew chief asked if I wouldn't mind getting the hell out of there. So we finished our transit, and I made a note of everything in my debrief. I passed it up the chain of command, but they basically wrote it off as some sort of visual phenomenon we had from a long day of flying in dry suits. It's always been hard to imagine our entire crew hallucinating the same thing. My first thought when I read this was that I've heard Japanese vessels carrying dangerous cargo are required to display a flashing red light at night or in ports or something like that. I couldn't find anything else about it, but I suppose it's possible you saw a mirage or reflection of that in the water. Just a thought. By the way guys, if you are enjoying this video so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It will help us out quite a bit, and if you don't enjoy the videos in the future anymore, you can always unsubscribe. Let's get back to the video. One of the most magical nights I ever had was when I was serving in a NZ Navy warship and we were homeward bound after a long and unpredictable deployment. I was dealing with a bout of insomnia and decided to go down aft for a breath of fresh air. It was a very dark, moonless night, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I really began to appreciate the phosphorescence glowing in our wake, bright green against the dark water. Then I looked closer to see a pod of dolphins playing in the phosphorescence, leaving their own bright glowing trails as they streaked through the water. Now, I knew what it was and what caused it, but it was something that I imagine would have appeared quite mystical to sailors back in the past. It was stunning though. I sat and watched them for about an hour. Such a vivid memory. Seeing bioluminescent bacteria is such a cool experience. I had the pleasure of seeing it once on the coast of Cape Cod in the summer. All the waves were crashing with this blue glow along the wave pattern. Really a surreal feeling. I saw it once while my family and I camped just off of Cranes Beach in Cape Ann. Our inflatable had a bright green comet tail, and when we ran all along the wet sand our footsteps looked like little fireworks. It's one of my happiest memories. I love watching the bioluminescence in the Cape. Sup, do not swim in the water in the Cape when it is glowing. I made that mistake once, and my skin was super irritated / itchy after. I guess whatever bacterial strain we have here is not super friendly to human skin. I was standing in the hangar bay waiting for morning muster at dawn somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Looking out at the ocean, I was intrigued by how smooth as glass the water was reflecting the clouds in the sky. Then the most beautiful, confusing, mesmerizing, and terrifying thing I ever saw happened. The water, for a moment, was so smooth that the horizon disappeared from view. The water was so smooth and reflective that it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the sky began. I honestly got dizzy knowing I was in the middle of the ocean floating on water, but my eyes were trying to convince me the ship was floating on nothing. Then the water started slightly rippling, and the horizon was visible again. Every morning at sea after that I looked at the horizon hoping it would happen again, but it never did. I've never found out what caused this scientifically. The closest thing I could ever find was it was some sort of variant of the Fata Morgana mirage. I don't think I will ever see anything as beautiful in my life ever again. Words fall extremely short at describing the feeling in that moment. I saw a sunrise like that while I was sailing back in 2008. I've never seen the sea so calm before. I remember thinking the same thing as you, that it was like a giant piece of glass as far as the eye could see, reflecting pale yellow and orange and blue as the sun rose. Then it was like the sea and sky merged, and it was almost like being upside down. I half expected to look up and see a reflection of myself and the ship above me. I didn't have my camera. I'm kind of glad. I got to lose myself in those few moments, burning the image into my brain forever. One day I might be lying senile in a bed in some hospital, no knowledge of who or where I am, but I'll still remember that golden mirror morning. I was a sailor in the Navy. While I was on lookout duty on the bridge at night, a dude walked and stood beside me, breathing hard. I was looking out at sea, and I was blocking the stairs going down, so I turned around to whisper sorry, and what do you know, there's no one. I was tired, so I chalked this up to hallucination, but it felt real. Edit, we were in the South China Sea. Edit. Pretty neat to see other Army/Navy folks with similar, if not the same exact experience. How many hours were you on duty that night? I swear I had experiences like that even in the barracks on land from sleep deprivation. We were 6 hours on and 6 hours off, and we were a few days in. That's why I'm leaning more on fatigue-induced hallucination than the paranormal. Staring out of binoculars for that long can give you a nice massive headache, and chances are I would say that's probably what it is. When I'm real tired, I always hear things that freak me out only to realize it's nothing. That's usually my cue for going to bed, otherwise I wake up sweating. It was about 3 AM during my watch on an ocean passage. I was sleep deprived and fatigued. The sailing yacht was silhouetted against the moon glistening on the water. Suddenly a dolphin jumped from the water below the boom, broad reach, and splashed back in. Then again. Then again. Then again for the next 3 hours, with the exact position and sound over and over and over. I felt like I was descending into madness, because I couldn't stop the apparent delusion. I'm still not sure if there ever was a dolphin, or if it just happened once, and was then stuck in some sort of mental loop. The games they play can really throw us on a loop. I was on a cruise in Alaska and dolphins seem to spend most of their time playing games that make them laugh, like they are cracking jokes for hours on end. Man has always assumed that he is more intelligent than dolphins because he has achieved so much, the wheel, New York, wars and so on, while all the dolphins had ever done was muck about in the water, having a good time. But, conversely, the dolphins had always believed that they were far more intelligent than man, for precisely the same reasons. Douglas Adams. So long, and thanks for all the fish. People can say whatever they want about how much better The Hitchhiker's book was than the movie. I agree, but if I see one more person call the movie bad I'll get an aneurysm. Fog. I don't care what anyone says, there is something in that fog. Edit, not a joke, a dead calm with thick fog is creepy, and will drive you to wild hallucinations. I imagine it's not dissimilar to a sensory deprivation chamber. I have a story about almost getting run down by an 800-foot Great Lakes freighter in a thick fog bank. We were on a 35-foot racing sailboat. Couldn't see the bow from the cockpit. Fog was so bad. A crew member said I hear a bow wake and moments later, a wall of steel appeared out of the fog. We were sailing right into the side of it. We could have touched it with a boat pole. That was the most scared I've ever been on the water. I can agree with you, that fog puts you in a different frame of mind. I was delivering a 75-foot custom up to Connecticut from Tortola when somewhere off Long Island we hit dead calm flat seas and unbelievable thick fog. Drop sails and motor onward. We had radar so wasn't terribly worried, but we were crossing convergence zones for New York, so it was mildly hairy. Suddenly we entered a lobster pot field. My watchmate went forward to guide us through the field, but the fog was so thick that we had to develop a signaling solution with a red handle to tell me to go to port, starboard or neutral. It was exhausting. After, I don't know, maybe an hour of this, we hear the loudest booming crack that either of us had ever heard. I thought a ship had exploded somewhere out there in the soup, so went to neutral and was trying to figure out what the hell was going on according to the radar, and called up the captain in case we needed to go render aid to a mishap. Captain comes up, I explain the circumstances and he just grins. It was the Concorde. I was in the US Navy and worked in communications. I was a supervisor on my watch and enjoyed working the night tours while on deployment. We stood 12-hour watches from 7 PM to 7 AM. Around 2 AM I hear some chatter over the 3MC, which is like our internal speaker system used between a few different stations on the ship. It's the bridge asking combat if they see anything on surface or air radar, maybe 10 miles out to our west. Combat returns with a negative, and I don't think anything of it. About 15 minutes goes by and the bridge asks again, and asks are they sure there's nothing there. Then they ask us if we have any message traffic about any ships in the area, aircraft or anomalous weather patterns. I ask one of the guys on watch to perform the request and now my interest is piqued. I walk out of the comm center and head up to the bridge. I was on a frigate, so the walk was quick, and I get up there and ask what's going on. One of my buddies points me over to the port side and we walk over. There's about 5 or 6 circular shaped lights about 10 to 15 miles out in the clouds, pretty large. They aren't moving or flying around but just looking stable. These lights are also casting lights downward on the ocean, and you can see the light refracting back at the water, almost as if it were a spotlight or a beam. From what we could see, it didn't appear to be lights shining up from the water because they wouldn't pass through the clouds. The clouds also weren't super thick, it was lightly overcast, and it was the middle of the night with no other light pollution on the water. There was nothing in message traffic about any ships, subs, or aircraft in the area. We were hundreds of miles from land and the last report of any unusual weather patterns was a waterspout a few hundred miles away. We tried to take pictures with our onboard digital camera using a long exposure, but we couldn't capture the phenomenon. After about 90 minutes the lights slowly faded, one by one, and within 15 minutes they had completely disappeared. I'm sure there's some sort of weather or atmospheric condition for what we saw, but for all intents and purposes, it fit the description of a UFO. Unidentified flying object. Yeah, I have a story that's not so much supernatural as it is just weird. I was working on a ship late one night while it was in port. Just doing typical office work, but on a ship instead of a cubicle. The room I was in was square and fairly spacious for a ship. I was up against one of the walls of the room, and on the far wall from me was a setup of other desks and chairs for other people. Above these desks was a clock. Regular old office clock. In a ho, I'm sitting there late one night, Microsoft excelling my heart out, only one in that office that night, when all of a sudden I just hear slam. I shit my heart out and spun around, scanned the room, nothing. Door to the room is firmly shut, I'm the only one in the room. I look down. The clock that is normally on the far wall a good 30 feet away from me is on the ground about 3 feet directly behind me. I immediately assume someone is with me, as we often did, so as my heart rate slowed to 150 BPM I check out the clock. It clearly had not been tampered with. Wall hadn't been messed with either as far as I could tell. I start radioing out to others. Only other people I knew to be on the ship were off on other levels. I don't believe in the supernatural too much, but for the life of me, I cannot explain how that clock got from the far wall to directly behind me on the floor with only one loud bang. I only worked as a walk-on, walk-off cabin attendant, but the old sea dogs always had far-fetched stories to tell. The engineer teaching us about watertight doors told us a story that happened to him on another ship that the same company used to own, but was decommissioned and scrapped in 2011. Thesis: watertight doors separate the different bulkheads, underwater compartments, that stop the whole ship from sinking. If there is a hole in the hull, think about the metal doors that slid down in the engine room of the Titanic. These doors are always closed. To get from compartment to compartment there was a lever that you pulled and the door opened. You stepped through. Then as soon as you let go of the lever, the door would close. For the safety of the ship it would close tight shut, even if there was a person blocking it. On this older ship there was an engineer who tripped and was crushed to death in one of these doors. Years later this engineer who told me the story tripped and fell on that same door and was about to be crushed to death in the same way, but just before killing him, it stopped and opened again, despite no one being around and nothing touching the lever. And before anyone says that there must have been some safety thing installed. No, as I said before, the one job of these doors is to close no matter what or who is in the way. My dad was a navigator for a US Navy warship for several years, and its usual patrol routes were along the eastern seaboard and along through the Caribbean. You know what that means: years spent traversing the Bermuda Triangle. While he said it was never a dangerous place in his experience, and that most trips were uneventful, he said that on a lot of trips some weird happened. Sometimes instruments would stop working / start giving obviously inaccurate readings and my dad would have to navigate the ship by stars. On these nights my dad said he would see balls of light flying around them, sometimes in slow arcs, and sometimes in wild patterns, but the balls always ended up diving into the sea without a sound. I don't know about the lights, but I think the reasons that instruments malfunction is because didn't they find a lot of a certain rock on the seabed that is very heavy in magnetism, so it messes with the instruments? I remember reading about the Bermuda Triangle as a kid. My stepdad had a cruise in the Navy going through it when I was 10. I remember being so freaked out about it that he would disappear. I was worried. He made it through unscathed. I was stationed on a ship where something tragic had occurred in the past and several people had died. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but there were several people on my ship that believed it was haunted. Especially in the middle of the night, there were several people who claimed that they had a supernatural experience where something moved or got flung across the room as if by a ghost, or someone once swore they actually saw a ghost. Like I said, I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but I swear there were times in the midnight hours where I felt an unsettling otherworldly presence. I even had a nightmare on the ship about a ghost finding me in my rack that had decided they were going to follow me from then on, and it really freaked me out. Honestly, though, I hate to break anyone's bubble, but looking back I really don't think there was anything supernatural going on. I think we were all stressed out and overworked on deployment, standing watches at all hours with very little sleep at times, so I honestly think we were all imagining it. Stuff moved. I mean, isn't that just called sailing? I don't have much boat experience, but some boats wave a lot in the waves. Yeah, things shake a lot, but it takes a lot to make something move. We go out fishing with a decent sized boat, and generally anything that has any grip on plastic doesn't move. What will happen though is you will feel terrible and sometimes get a headache from laying down. If you're not used to laying down on a boat, it can make you feel absolutely terrible. Lost my lunch the first time, it sucks. That could be part of it. I got one for ya. I was in the US in 2010 to 2014 and deployed twice on 2 different ships. The first ship I was on, the US Pearl Harbor LSD-52, we were deployed doing a Westpac. There was a span of time where we were just sailing around in open waters, not near any land whatsoever. I was one of the topside watch standers, meaning that I was responsible for reporting any other sea or air activity, i.e. other boats or airplanes. The area we were in was so incredibly remote that there was almost no activity anywhere. Didn't see a single boat or plane for days. One night I was standing the midnight to 4 AM watch and had just switched to the forward lookout. So I'm standing at the bridge of the ship on the outer deck looking forward. It must have been about 3:45 AM because my relief just came up to let me know he would take over from here. We talked for a few minutes when all of a sudden I got a call from the bridge. The officer on duty was asking me what backquote that was. Me and my watch relief look forward and there is this giant light coming out of the ocean. This thing was huge, probably the size of 2 mobile homes put side by side. It comes up from the ocean and then passes overhead maybe 70 feet from the top of the ship and there was absolutely no sound. Everyone started freaking out. And the craziest thing is that none of our radars picked up any activity whatsoever. We all were just in awe. And no one had any explanation, but we all agreed that we witnessed a UFO. So that UFO that was buzzing around the limits off the coast of San Diego in 2004. I was aboard the Princeton at that time. I was a fire controlman, meaning I had access and knowledge to the ship's radar systems. The Princeton was the air command/defense platform for the Nimitz strike group. The whole phenomenon was 100% real, and I remember watching the exact same videos you've seen on CNN back then. Weird thing is the video was a regular MP4 video, or some kind of video file or another. The video made its way around the ships, and within 48 hours it was completely gone. Vanished, just like that off the ship's LAN. It was all anyone could talk about for a full day, then no one ever talked about it again. Weird. I've read about these events and a strange thing is that a pilot, Dave Fravor, who claims to have seen a flying Tic Tac is adamant that no people came aboard ships shortly afterwards to confiscate radar data etc. whilst other people who were there at the time seem to totally disagree. Distress flares in the middle of the Indian Ocean sailing Nigeria-Japan at night when I was a third mate. Looked less than 4 miles away. Altered course to it, called the Old Man. Found nothing and no one over the course of 2 hours. I was the only one to see it, and I know what I saw. My watchman was down closing cabin shades. I understand why we had to move on. Keeps me up some nights though. Did we come so close to saving someone's life and just leave them there? Alone in the ocean? No food or water? Did someone think they were rescued, but we ended up too far from them? Should we have waited until daytime? Did I just hallucinate? I don't know why your story hits me the most. I would also be haunted by those questions. You did everything you could, man. It is not your fault. You are a good person. These types of immensely consequential what if questions tend to weigh all the more heavily on people who care for others. I believe it is more wise to feel relief that you tried to investigate what you saw in the hopes of helping. Regardless of it having been real or a hallucination, you and your team put the effort into checking. Thank you for sharing your story. Yup, strange on the radar moving at massive speeds to low to be aircraft, and where no aircraft should be. Weird lights, audio and visual hallucinations generally from being tired on late watches and a good sign it's time for a handover. I'm a hydrographic surveyor. One summer while mapping coastline we passed over a large, torpedo-shaped object stationary just above the ocean floor. Didn't realize until processing and mapping the data later on. It was on our transit route in and out of a small port, so we passed over the area probably a dozen times over the span of a month. It was there once and only once. We'll never be sure, but we reported it to the proper channels as a possible submarine. Creepy. And then there was the giant squid. Still gives me the creeps. The giant squid. You can't just say that and not give a story. It was pretty much the same thing. One pass through a transit area showed the distinct shape of a squid, like we could clearly count the arms, and the rest of the passes there was nothing. It was massive. Our boat was 50 meters and this thing was bigger. Didn't notice it until at the end of the day when processing the data. It's such a creepy, surreal feeling when you put the data together into a map at the end of the day and you realize something terrifyingly massive was right underneath you. I was also told a story about the time the boat was in the Caribbean and some of the crew decided to jump off and go for a swim at the end of the day. Turns out the side scan sonar spotted a shark the size of a pickup truck swimming underneath the boat at the same time. They didn't go swimming anymore after that. Haha. So many great stories. Twice we caught swordfish in the ROVs. They were drawn to the lights, I guess. They were dead by the time we got the ROVs back to the surface. Saw a huge pack of hammerhead sharks once. We launched the ROV just as the stewards were dumping food scraps, and on the live feed there were sharks everywhere going back for the scraps. Too many to count, just 10-15 meters underneath us. On the surface was as calm and clear as can be, you wouldn't know what was going on below. This is the end of the video. Thank you guys for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed watching this, you might as well watch these too.